Welcome to Gartner ThinkCast. I'm Rob O'Donoghue, a Senior Director Analyst in Gartner's CIO Research Group, focusing on leadership, culture, people, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm back today with part 2 of a special 3-part series on one of the most pressing issues of our time: diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you missed part 1, featuring my conversation with Chris Steadley, the Global Head of DEI here at Gartner, let me suggest that you click back and give it a listen. And check out our complimentary Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Resource Centre, which is chock full of insight and linked in the show notes. As for today, we're focusing on equity, what it is, why it matters, and how it's changed over the whirlwind pandemic years. And we're joined by Emily Strother, a senior researcher here at Gartner, where she works with the HR practice on employee experience, the employment value proposition, and of course, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Emily, great to have you on the show. Thanks for taking time out to talk about equity today.
Thanks so much for having me, Rob. I'm excited to be here.
Great to have you here. So, Emily, before we dive into the conversation around equity, I think it's important to build foundation. How did equity, the E in the DE&I, and it's right bang in the middle of that acronym, so it's very important, how did it become part of the conversation? And what exactly does it mean?
I want to start with your second question first and sort of set the foundation of what does equity mean. At Gartner, our scripted answer to defining equity is the fair treatment and equality of access to opportunity, information, and resources. And this is built through the identification and elimination of unfair biases, stereotypes, or barriers that may inadvertently exclude underrepresented employees. And so to your point, Rob, diversity, equity, and inclusion has really gained momentum with organizations as they look to advance representation and improve business outcomes. And so leaders have been faced with increased pressure and expectation from employees and shareholders to prioritize this. And one of the ways we've been seeing organizations doing that is through adding equity into the conversation. A couple of proof points that we see from Google Trends as well as Gartner research. First, we see an upward trend in the use of equity. So user searches related to business and industry made the acronym DEI 200% more popular in the second half of 2020 than it was at the same time 5 years earlier. In addition, we see that over a third of our HR leaders that we've interviewed and surveyed included equity as a part of their language on DEI in 2021. So a lot of strong evidence pointing to the importance of equity.
Absolutely. And it's really coming to the fore in the conversations I'm having with leaders. And in many ways, there's still a lack of understanding between the difference of equity and equality. I actually just recently did a webinar on the topic of equity, and I ran a poll, and 48%, I think, of the attendees honestly were open and showing their true responses that they didn't know the difference between the two. So that was certainly interesting, a key takeaway. Can you explain what the difference between equity and equality is?
So equity and equality are very much conflated in everyday DEI conversations. While both of them are very important, understanding the difference between the two is a really essential part of making sure we can deliver on them accurately at our organizations. Many organizations are even surprised when they discover that employees may be treated equally, but not equitably. And so they have this question of why. That's because organizations often strive to create equal workplaces by treating everyone the same. And so in practice, sometimes equality can mean everyone accessing the same inflexible policies or processes with little consideration of the variations of needs that people may have. So this might mean employees actually experience an unfair work environment. An equity strategy focuses on leveling the playing field, if you will, and ensures all employees feel psychologically safe enough to be able to participate and contribute in the organization. So let me give you an example that's a little less theoretical. Many organizations give employees all of the same technology when they onboard at the company. The same computer, the same keyboard, the same software. This creates equality for all employees. However, for an employee who may be blind or visually impaired, this doesn't actually help them accomplish their work the same way that it would help someone who is non-blind or visually impaired. So to make it equitable instead, organizations must work to provide these employees with the technologies to help them improve their work capabilities to the same degree. And so this could include something like larger monitors or Braille keyboards, to name a few. And this helps organizations be more equitable and not just equal.
Definitely a great example, brings it to life. And I think there's a key word that you mentioned in there that I probably was even overlooking until recently, is that of needs, right? It's leveling the playing field, what the individual needs to get to that same starting point as others. Here at Gartner, we believe in making data-driven decisions. So I want to pause and point you towards our research on how to measure diversity, equity, and inclusion. Download it at the link in our show notes and use these insights to help managers set and meet targets, evaluate inclusion through employee surveys that focus on 7 key areas, and improve equity across the organization. So let's talk about the benefits then of working in an equitable organization. What value is it to the individuals that get that equitable treatment?
First, I think it's just important to note that for a lot of organizations, it's just the right thing to do, right? And so oftentimes that's where organizations start. However, as we really get into the business side of it and why it's important, two really come to mind. The first is the increased attention and engagement from stakeholders on DEI. So like we mentioned earlier, shareholders and employees are increasingly pressuring us to do this. And so we need to be really intentional about how we are engaging them. And this is a great way to do so. The second is creating a more defined and clear definition of our DE&I strategy. And this actually makes it easier to make progress on this strategy. And so these two pieces together really impact our employee experience and help contribute to factors like retention, productivity, and psychological safety. So there's a strong business case for creating a more equitable organization.
Definitely jumping out obvious business case. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit more about maybe different areas that equity can pop up in the workplace. And for me, when I started to dive into the equity conversation, the one that maybe was most obvious is pay equity, and probably the one that gets a lot of attention. Can you talk a bit about that and maybe others that are often potentially overlooked?
You are definitely right in that pay equity has been one of the most publicly discussed over the past 3 to 5 years. However, another piece that's really been emerging in the last year or two is this idea of succession, especially as organizations work to diversify their leadership bench. And so we see that the lack of leadership diversity is unfortunately not new news. But even though we've been working on this for a few decades now, we've really not seen a lot of progress. And so organizations are facing pressure from internal and external stakeholders on improving the equity in our leadership bench. The word we've been focusing on and really trying to drive is accountability. And in this case, accountability impacts leaders' decision-making through customizing DEI strategies to specific leaders' goals to really create more equitability on teams. And then actually measuring the progress that we are seeing, either with individual leaders or helping them use their data to impact their decision-making progress on promotions, on hiring, on really creating talent decisions that are equitable for all.
So another aspect of equity, and I think you've touched on it a little bit, but maybe to go deeper into it, is that of equity in the talent lifecycle relating to talent attraction, retention, development. It's literally the same conversation I'm having every day with clients at the moment is around this. Where does equity connect into those processes? And is there a lack of fairness embedded in those processes?
Well, especially as organizations are considering how they're retaining their employees, it doesn't surprise me at all that that's a conversation you're having right now. Equity can and should be incorporated throughout the entire talent lifecycle. And embedding this is important to different practices, systems, and processes. And so we see this throughout attraction recruitment, employee development, performance management, and succession planning. So let's take recruiting as an example. Based on some of our recent data analysis, there are quite significant differences in how different kinds of candidates are treated or feel like they're treated, how likely they are to discontinue an application process, and what their perceptions are of onboarding effectiveness. And so leaders are working to develop candidate experience strategies to account for the preferences and treatments of all types of candidates to ensure that these processes are equitable. So to your point, getting to those specific needs, not just equal experience. Some of these small improvements include making sure everyone's expectations are set, especially if one candidate may not have as much experience with the type of interview process that they're currently going through, or alternatively, making sure every candidate is provided with equal prep material to make sure that they all get started on the same point of the interview.
That's really interesting because what I think and what I know, again, talking to clients about the great resignation, the great reshuffle, reflection, whatever great angle you want to put on it, how is equity having an impact around that, Emily?
Well, the first thing I would just note is that DEI is table stakes, and that includes how are we creating equitability at our organization. Employees and candidates want this, and if your organization isn't offering it, you aren't going to keep talent. The second is we just see an increased urgency as well as creating differentiation and showing individuals what experience they have in the organization. So really creating a relationship with these candidates, and by showing them how they matter as a person, how their specific needs are being considered throughout the process, we can really help create equitability and also differentiation among other potential job offers that they're considering.
Yeah, definitely. I'm seeing it, as I mentioned, relating to that kind of human deal, right? And treating people like people rather than employees. That's really coming to the fore. Somewhat connected to that is this concept of hybrid work, right? It's something that we're probably all very familiar with, what it means now compared to 2 years ago. Are you seeing specific challenges through the equity lens around hybrid work and how remote work is getting done?
The short answer is yes, absolutely. Most organizations, as they're planning for a post-pandemic world, or at least in the middle of the pandemic world, are considering what does it look like to create a greater amount of remote work options, which is how we're really creating this sort of hybrid world. The question that this raises for many of the leaders that I've spoken to is, how do we create equitable experiences for both our remote and non-remote employees? And this is a hard question. A lot of organizations are still in the process of figuring out what works best for them. But we have seen some organizations explore a couple of ways to ensure all employees are getting equitable opportunities to contribute and influence decisions. First is just making video meetings the default option. As we think about creating equal opportunities for those people who are remote, we really need to make sure that they can participate even if they're not physically in the office. And so in order to do that, we need to make sure that all employees have access to the technology they need in order to make this happen, as well as our facilities. So equipping meeting rooms with video monitors and changing the layouts to facilitate more natural conversations. And then just thinking about who's running the meeting. Are we varying if it's our people in the office, if it's our employees working from home that are leading or contributing to these meetings? Another thing that we're seeing, this really gets more to our remote employees maybe having some more flexibility benefits than our non-remote employees. And so how do we create equitability for those employees that really have to be in the office? And so one of the things we're seeing here is increasing work schedule flexibility to ensure equity. Sometimes this is making sure that they have their own work hours that they're setting themselves, and so they can sort of participate how they choose. Sometimes it's clarifying for employees that they're not expected to respond to non-emergency events outside of their work hours, or even creating work hours that are maybe meeting free or that create just more space for them. And so just really thinking about what does the individual need. Another thing we're seeing, which I alluded to, is just this workplace technology. If we have the technology that can support collaboration and resource scheduling and the digital experience, then we can really make sure that we're using these tools to enable all of our employees.
The hybrid environment poses new challenges, among them being expected to identify leader and manager needs and determine how best to deliver them. Listen to our webinar we've linked in the show notes to learn how to equip leaders with the skills and support needed to drive future organizational success. With the work we're doing in Gartner around equity, I know there's a 4-part framework that have been recently developed to create a more fair employee experience. I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
As we began this work, we found that despite all of the attention that we've given to this, most employees still don't feel like their work environment is fair. And so through our research, we've identified 4 elements that contribute to a more fair employee experience. What we see as a part of this is that leaders can increase fairness in everyday employee experience by helping employees feel informed, supported, considered, and acknowledged. So the questions we often hear asked around this are employees informed? Does the organization provide the information they need to succeed at their jobs and advance in their careers? Are they supported? How well does the organization help them manage their well-being and work-life balance? Are they considered? Do all employees really get a fair chance at opportunities that they're qualified for? And then finally, are they acknowledged? Do their leaders and managers recognize their contributions throughout the organization?
There's so much in that, and I know there's a lot of research we have to kind of go deeper in that. So definitely would encourage folks to check that out and to learn a bit more on it. So in the conversations you're having with clients, it's always good to bring in case studies, real world examples. And I know we're still early in the whole equity journey, but do you have a few that resonate well with clients that you use a lot that you could share?
Gartner has many case examples from our research, in particular on pay equity, that resonate well with our clients. One example in particular is around prompting pay conversations. And so we oftentimes see organizations use these conversations to encourage employees to voice their concerns by sharing how their pay compares to others and setting up one-on-one conversations before pay decisions are finalized. And so what this really does is help improve the perception of fairness in pay. One plug I'd like to make on this is that it's such an important topic, particularly as it relates to our total rewards research, that in 2022, we're going to continue exploring this topic. And so really expect some new research on this.
Nice teaser there, Emily. And really focusing around where next? Where do you see this conversation going? And not only conversation, but maybe practices around equity. What do you see emerging in the near term?
Equity is quickly becoming a critical component as we define D&I efforts, both inside and outside of corporate spaces. And so I think one area where we'll see equity going next is beyond HR and beyond talent management processes and really being embedded more into business processes. And so I think we're going to see the best organizations not just seeing equity as an HR imperative, but as a business imperative.
Emily, so much food for thought. They're really insightful takeaways. You've given actionable advice, lots of real world examples as well. I think it was really, really beneficial to the listeners.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be back wherever you listen to podcasts 2 weeks from today with the final episode of this 3-part series, when we'll be focusing specifically on inclusion. Please rate, review, subscribe, and share ThinkCast with a colleague so neither of you miss it.
ThinkCast is a production of Gartner. This podcast may not be reproduced or distributed in any form without Gartner's permission. It consists of the opinions of Gartner's research organization, which should not be construed as statements of fact. Content provided by other speakers is expressly the views of the speaker and/or their organization. While the information contained in this podcast has been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, Gartner disclaims all warranties as to the accuracy, completeness, or adequacy of such information. Although Gartner research may address legal and financial issues, Gartner does not provide legal or investment advice, and its research should not be construed or used as such.